Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining our webinar today on modernizing your database with MySQL in the cloud. I'm Hormuz Romer, and I'll be your host today. A few housekeeping notes before I turn it over to our speakers. The webinar is being recorded, and we will send you an email afterwards with a link to it. Please feel free to share that with your colleagues as well. Second, the webinar is interactive, and we are going to be asking you a few questions through some polls, and you'll see those pop up, and we would love to have your input on those. And finally, we will be taking questions throughout the webinar. You can see a question button at the bottom right corner of your screen. Please click that to submit your questions at any time, but we will be answering them all at the end of the webinar. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator for today, Sushant. Over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Hormaz. And hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. So as Hormaz said, we are going to make this interactive. So throughout the webinar, you will see some poll questions. We'd love to learn more about the audience. So when you see them, we'll walk you through the question and the choices. And then we'd love to get some feedback on understanding the audience for this webinar. With that, let me turn it over and introduce the speakers for today's session. Ashok, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thanks, Sushant. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashok Mahajan, and I'm a senior partner solution architect with Amazon Web Services. I'm part of the global startup team focusing on ISVs, especially our partners in security segment. I've been part of the information security community throughout my career and have been closely associated with application security, identity and access, data protection, access governance across finance, healthcare, and media domains.
Awesome. And then our second speaker is Min Hank. Min Hank, would you mind introducing yourself today?
Sure thing. Thanks, Vishant. My name is Min Heng Ko. I currently lead the product management team here at Baffle. Prior to Baffle, I was at Oracle, where I was responsible for cryptographic features and capabilities of the Oracle database. And I've been in this database security industry for over 2 decades now.
Awesome. So with that, let's get to the crux of the session, and let me hand it over to Ashok to walk you through this part.
Thank you, Sushant. Um, as most of you know, in today's world, most modern applications are actually built using a microservice architecture and in the cloud. When we look at these requirements for these apps, there are a number of factors that are contributing to the scale, performance, and availability needs for these applications. Unlike in the past, businesses are today expanding their presence into the new market to reach new users, which result in huge user growth. That also complicates the overall architecture of the application. The expectation for developers as well as of end users in today's world is drastically different from what it used to be. The cost of compute and storage has gone down drastically over the past decade, resulting in companies having to access more data than ever, which basically resulted in terabytes and even petabyte scales of data available to a company. As businesses embark on this digital transformation journey, they do not want to dilute the user experience. In fact, more often than not, we have seen businesses today want to have much more interactive experience with the end user, and that puts a lot of burden on the apps and databases. And that's not it. In today's world, there are scenarios where an end user will be leveraging multiple devices that complicates the overall architecture and puts a lot of burden on applications and databases to the tune that in some scenarios, the databases are supposed to handle millions of transactions per second with many millions of people simultaneously using the app. So all of this has actually led to a highly distributed, loosely coupled application architecture that we see powering the most demanding workload in the cloud today. Now let's do a quick poll to see what is your primary location of your database in today's world. Do you have everything on premises? Are you using AWS RDS? Are you using AWS but self-managing it on EC2? Or you are using a different cloud provider? You should be able to see poll on your screen right now. For those of you who have voted, thank you. And by the looks of poll result, it looks like we have audience scattered across all four segments where we have pretty much equal distribution of the databases in today's world. Now let's move on to the next slide. Why manage databases in cloud? If you're running a legacy database in data center or a self-managed in even in cloud, you know that provisioning, operating, scaling, and managing these databases is tedious and time consuming. And not to say they are expensive. You have to worry about operational efficiency issues, you have to look at hardware and software requirements, patching, availability, and much more. And on top of it, you have to worry about security and compliance requirements such as PCI, HIPAA, FedRAMP, and others. It is estimated that most IT teams spend 70% of their time on things that do not deliver differentiated business value. Things like hardware and software installation, upgrade, patching on its own account for around 40% of that time, whereas things like backup, recovery, data load, unload accounts for like 20% of that time. In today's world, businesses want to spend more time innovating and building new applications to fulfill their customer needs and not managing infrastructure. Remember, as we innovate quickly and move to DevOps based model, we also introduced a faster rate of change. This means as you think about data and managing your own database, you need to think about this rapid rate of change that comes along with it. I think we all can agree that economics is an important consideration for every business. Businesses, do not want to invest millions of dollars upfront in hardware and licensing costs and hope to be successful. In fact, a lot of organizations want to hedge their success by only paying for what they use without capping how much they can grow. These dynamics combined have changed the way businesses build applications and why modern applications, along with many databases, are moving to cloud. Since the beginning of Amazon.com, we have seen a large number of world's largest and busiest production databases. So we understand how expensive and complex it can be to manage these database administration functions for constantly changing applications. And adapting these to cloud operations requires new skills and training. This is why we created these managed database services, which increases the efficiency of your database by automating these undifferentiated administrative tasks and removing human error. With managed databases, you can actually realize benefits such as improved performance, scalability, availability, durability, and much more. By improving the efficiency of your databases, you are able to reduce cost. For example, when it comes to scaling your database needs and you have a very spiky workload where you do not anticipate a huge volume every day, but you have a spiky peak sometime, you don't have to prepare and have the resources available all the time. In fact, you can use something as simple as Amazon Aurora Serverless for instant scaling. With Amazon RDS, you're basically freeing up your team's resources and can actually develop that hours and budget to focus on innovating on behalf of your customer to fulfill their needs. To illustrate the burden of managing database, let's take a quick look at this scale that shows various database administrative tasks typically required to keep a database up and running. With Amazon RDS, it removes the burden by managing a number of these tasks, including automated failover, backup and recovery, upgrades, push button scaling, patching, and more, just to name a few. This leaves you with only the task that matters to you the most: the schema design, query construction, and query optimization. Today, we have a number of choices of relational and non relational databases that suit your precise data model needs, access pattern, and operational needs. With a microservice architecture, businesses are using a variety of purpose built databases, matching each workload to the right database to support the demand of their modern applications. When you think about relational databases, you can choose from seven of the popular engines: Amazon Aurora with MySQL compatibility, Amazon Aurora with PostgreSQL compatibility, MySQL, MariaDB, PostgreSQL, Oracle, and SQL Server. But that's not it, right? If you don't have a tabular a data model and you feel that relational database does not fulfill your needs, we have created something as Amazon DynamoDB, a database that optimizes running key value pair at a single digit millisecond latency. We have Amazon Elastic Cache for in memory workload. We have DocumentDB for JSON workloads and Neptune for your graph database needs. And you can pick up the database that suits your need. For today's conversation, we will be focusing on Amazon RDS only.
So, a short, quick question for you, right? When I look at this slide, I always wonder, why does AWS have so many database options?
That's a good question, Sushant. Um, when we look at the legacy technology, right, we have seen that one size fits all does not really work, and ultimately it leads to trade-off and compromises. Either a database administration or the developer will be making a compromise to meet the business needs. I think our strategy is very simple here. All of our databases are purpose built and optimized for the workload it is intended to do, whether it's relational, key value, document, or in memory. So the developers never have to make trade-off on the functionality, performance, or scale that it is typically required with the old guard relational databases. And on top of it, all of our systems are battle tested and have high availability, performance, scalability, and security built right in to meet your needs. Now, since we talked about Amazon relational databases, including Amazon Aurora, this is basically our collection of managed services that makes it simple to set up, operate, scale database in the cloud in just a few clicks. With Amazon RDS, we have over 12 plus years of operational expertise, security best practices, and innovation. As a managed database, Amazon RDS offers fully managed open source database offerings, RDS for PostgreSQL, MySQL, and MariaDB. Amazon RDS open source database provides you the same benefit as an open source database while simplifying the database management and enabling you to quickly start building new applications or even migrate existing one. Amazon RDS also consistently keeps up with the latest and major and minor upgrades to ensure that you combine the benefits of latest open source innovation with latest AWS innovation in a single service. You can continue to deploy your database using the known code, feature, and tools you're familiar with. Amazon RDS is also cost effective, and for organizations who are seeking to break free from the costly licensing fee, they can migrate to RDS and benefit from features like multiple AZDB cluster, which is currently available for RDS for MySQL and RDS for PostgreSQL. With this deployment option, you are able to improve your write transaction latency by 2 times, reduce failover to typically under 35 seconds, and increase your read capacity. Now let's do a quick poll to see what is your database of choice for open source databases. Your options are PostgreSQL, MySQL, MariaDB, and others. Thank you everyone who is able to cast their vote. And looking at the results, I'm not surprised. It seems like MySQL is definitely the preferred choice between the audience so far. But I'm curious. I see there are others who have mentioned that other is also an option. So in the chat, if you can, just share the different databases that you are using when it comes to open source databases. With Amazon RDS, you basically have the choice to deploy any of these 7 managed databases in the cloud, including Amazon Aurora with MySQL compatibility, as well as Amazon RDS for MySQL. With Amazon RDS Custom, you are basically able to deploy your managed databases for applications that requires customization of the underlying operating system and database environment. But that's not it. If you need a hybrid relational database environment, Amazon also offers Amazon RDS on AWS Outpost. With RDS on Outpost, you can deploy fully managed database instance in your on-prem environment just as you would in cloud. Similar to Amazon RDS, Amazon Aurora is a relational based database service that combines the speed and availability of high end commercial database with the simplicity and cost effectiveness of an open source database. Aurora is fully compatible with MySQL and PostgreSQL, allowing existing applications and tools to run without requiring any modification, and offers a range of developer tools for building serverless and even machine learning driven applications. Aurora has the performance of five times the performance of MySQL and three times the performance of standard PostgreSQL, with the security, availability, reliability of a commercial grade database at almost one tenth of the cost. Now, I quickly want to touch upon some of the recent innovations when it specifically comes to RDS for open source engines. In the past, making updates to database, like any major upgrade, schema changes required significant time and resources to execute, while at the same time trying to minimize the downtime. With the blue-green deployment option, in just a few clicks, you can create a managed staging environment, which is also known as your green environment, to safely test database changes without actually affecting your production database or the blue environment. Blue-green deployment is available to your customers using Amazon Aurora MySQL compatibility editions, RDS for MySQL, or RDS for MariaDB. Amazon RDS also optimize, write performance by simplifying our implementation of atomic writes for RDS for MySQL. With optimized writes, you can gain basically up to two times improvement in terms of your write transaction throughput at no additional cost. Also, to speed up your query processing on RDS for MySQL, we have released Amazon RDS Optimized Read, which improves up to 50% of your query processing time. Now, when we talk about migration, let's look at the brief options that are available to you when you want to migrate or think about migrating to cloud databases. I think the first and the simplest consideration of all, which most of us can relate, is basically a homogeneous migration, where you keep the same database engine with minimal to zero downtime. We offer free and self-service tools, which include database migration service that you can use for homogeneous migration from your legacy database services to managed services on AWS. We also provide a schema conversion tool that allows you to automatically assess and convert database schemas and code object at scale with zero downtime. We also have specialized database programs to offer migration support and expert advice. It includes DB Freedom, which is a unique program designed to assist customers like you migrate to AWS. We can help you assess your system, recommend a migration path, and help you execute the migration. Finally, we have a team of experienced AWS professionals and a network of AWS partners with deep expertise in database application migration, and some partners who even specialize in helping customers navigate through sometimes very complex licensing aspects. In short, whatever your preference is, do it yourself or do it with partners or have AWS do it for you. We can help you migrate and modernize your database applications. Cloud security at AWS is the highest priority, and we follow a shared responsibility model where AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud, the physical infrastructure, facilities, the actual compute, basically the building block that all AWS services run on. You, as a customer, are responsible for security in the cloud. This means you secure your workload and applications that you deploy in the cloud and have the flexibility to put more emphasis on the security of sensitive data and adjust as needed in areas where you have less concern. You own and are responsible for managing your data, including various encryption options, classifying your assets, and even using the right IAM tools to apply the appropriate permissions. When it comes to security of your databases, you can manage access to your Amazon RDS resources and your databases on DB instance. The method you choose basically to manage access depends on what type of task the user needs to perform. A few examples that I can think of, when you have to run a DB instance in a virtual private cloud, basically that gives you an isolation in your own virtual private network. You can use Amazon IAM policies to assign permissions and identify and determine who is allowed to manage different AWS RDS resources. You can even set up encryption on your DB level and at the snapshots level as well, and use AWS key management services for the key management. You can also configure RDS management of the master user password in Secrets Manager. Along with these native services, we have an advanced network of partners like Baffle. Baffle and AWS together empower organizations to migrate, use, analyze, and share large volume of data at unlimited scale while ensuring sensitive data is dynamically de-identified and visible only to authorized users as per their role. Now let's hear from Minhang how Baffle helps you achieve your data security posture with no-code encryption and data tokenization.
Thank you, Ashok, for that great introduction of AWS capabilities as it pertains to MySQL, both offerings on Aurora and RDS. As mentioned for my section, I'm going to drill down a little bit into the security aspects of MySQL. Ashok already covered the wealth of infrastructure security capabilities that's there. So I'm specifically focusing on what MySQL can offer, and then what Baffle can add on top of that to meet modern compliance requirements that I suspect many of you are confronted with. But first, a quick discussion about the responsibility of the data. As Ashok was shown earlier on the slide about the shared responsibility model. At the end of the day, the data that you have in your enterprise is your responsibility. Certainly, at least the various governments and organizations that are regulating that data think so. And as you can see from this colorful chart, that compliance requirements are only growing, they're widespread. More importantly, there's more and more enforcement and scrutiny. I'm sure some of you have already heard about the fines that EU have given to Facebook for essentially leaking or transferring information outside the scope of GDPR. But that's only going to be the tip of the iceberg. At the end of the day, the moral of the story is that there's growing concern about what's happening to data that all businesses are in possession of and processing. Sorry, I think I accidentally muted there. If I were to reduce the what these compliance requirements are trying to say down to maybe a few sentences, it really just comes down to being able to have full control of your data and to show they have control of your data. I picked a couple of sentences out from some of the most common or at least well-known compliance requirements, GDPR and PCI DSS. And while it might seem like cherry picking, I actually do feel like this is the essence of what they're asking for, right? As far as GDPR is concerned, it really is trying to ask that businesses can show and actually enforce the fact that those who have access to the data really needs to have access to it, and that nobody else who should have access to the data should be able to inadvertently or deliberately get it. So this would be like your EU citizens, address, for example, right? There are a few cases where there's a legitimate reason why you might need that, but plenty of cases where administrators or people who are, sort of in the process of operations that might have a chance to access it, they should be prevented from being able to see that. Likewise, with PCI DSS, being a payment card industry standard, they're particularly concerned about the personal account number, or PAN, which is their term for the credit card number. And here, it basically says what you might expect, which is really only people who have a legitimate need needs to see that number. So it's actually fairly intuitive. The thing is that it's actually also been pretty difficult to achieve as far as using some of the security capabilities that's available today. And why is this important as far as these organizations are implementing compliance requirements is concerned? Well, this is a cover picture, and it's actually a real database graph from the 2023 hot off the press Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. Those of you who are actually familiar with the report know that they've been doing this for nearly a couple of decades now, where they'll actually analyze data breaches, try to get a sense of the cause, and get some insights into what is actually happening in the threat landscape when it pertains to data. And they put this on the cover because they kind of want to send a message that we're hardly winning the war against data breaches, or I guess those who might want to gain access to sensitive data. So this is a problem that still needs to be fully solved, and implementing the right data security controls is really the way to get a handle on it. But I've been sort of speaking at this, speaking to this at a pretty high level. So I want to maybe make it a little bit more concrete by, ripping something out of the headlines. When I was putting this deck together about a week ago, I just did a very quick news search for data breaches. And just for fun, those of you who might have free time and are interested in just the state of cybersecurity today, at any point in time, just go to Google News or your favorite news aggregator of choice and just do a search for data breach. I'm almost certain that you're going to find a new headline of a data breach within the last day, and worst case, within the last few days. That is, where the state of things are. I happen to pick this one for a few reasons. One, obviously, Tesla is a well-known company, so it feels more relevant. But also, it just so happened that this one had a few more details. Most companies that have a data breach don't really share a lot. So here, as you can see from the headline, we know a bit of details about it. It makes it more interesting to analyze in a hypothetical case study. Now, first caveat, I do not know that this breach was due to a breach of the MySQL database. I did do some background research and confirm that Tesla does have a MySQL database in their system. So this is more of a thought experiment. So as you can see, some interesting notes here. This breach was due to insiders. So obviously, probably people who had access to sensitive data. I suspect maybe they shouldn't have access because they leaked it. It had very personal information. I would think social security number is one of the top things that any company should be protecting and making sure it doesn't get leaked. And also, it was sent over to a third party in Germany, which has a nice or European, well, not nice, but as potential, it's over to Europe where they're particularly sensitive about data privacy there. So what does this, actually, before we get started and start analyzing this, I just want to take a quick poll of the audience to see what flavor of MySQL you might be using, because it's going to speak to speak to sort of the capabilities that you might have at your disposal. So feel free to answer the poll question as I read off the choices here. So basically the poll question is your team or company currently using MySQL Enterprise? Sometimes it's called the commercial edition. Yes, so select yes if you are actually using the commercial enterprise edition today in your company. No, if you're using the MySQL community or some other free version. There's a few other distributions. Even MariaDB you can kind of consider a free version of MySQL in some cases. Or, I did see at least a couple of responses to Ashok's poll earlier where there are folks on the call who are not using MySQL at all. Feel free to mark that one. So, and as we're waiting for the results to come in, trying to check, like I said, the results. I just want to quickly note that even though we're covering MySQL today, the Baffle actually offers solutions for the other database like Postgres and other databases as well. All right, so quick summary of the poll results. We actually have about 50-50 of folks who are actually using MySQL Enterprise Commercial and maybe a couple who are actually not using MySQL. So, okay, great. So I won't really drill too deep into the MySQL community security features, but for those of you who are on MySQL Enterprise, you already know that you have encryption capabilities available at your disposal with some key management. So basically, it would be transparent data encryption that allow you to encrypt, tables, table spaces, and databases. So you could get that data at rest encryption capability today. Now, the thing that you might already know, of course, is that this is actually not intended to protect against anybody who has select privileges, right? If you were to execute a query, and I'll show in the demo later, you actually get visibility into that data. So, this is one of those things where it's particularly good for a threat vector where someone might steal your disk or steal the file of the file system, but not through database access. You may or may not know that there's a masking plugin that comes with that MySQL Enterprise capability. And by a MySQL plugin, it really is just giving you some functions that can call within your query to mask the data. it's actually not meant for access control because you could easily execute a query without those functions, and you would just see the unmasked version of the data. But it's a convenience feature if you're writing an application and you want to say mask out everything but the last 4 digit credit card number in the application itself. And of course, you always have the traditional grants and database access controls to be able to limit who can do selects. But if you're a privileged user, honestly, you'll be able to bypass that relatively easily, or you might already have the privileged access. So going back to this case or hypothetical thought experiment with the data breach that I was showing earlier, what would have happened if you had implemented all the possible built-in security features for MySQL? Well, I think, first of all, I can't emphasize enough that it is still worth implementing these security features. They do actually protect against a threat, but these security features were designed and built quite a while ago, and back then the landscape was different. The threat vectors are different. So you'll see right here, right? The breach was due to insiders who likely had high privileges. So the fact that you had encrypted the data with TDE, or maybe even if you had tried to install the masking plugin, they essentially would have had no effect or hardly any effect on an insider who had the ability to query the data. In fact, that's the way that these features are designed. Likewise, the database access controls, if you were not just a DBA, but maybe a backup user or someone who had an operational access to the database, you likely would have had a way to gain access to the data anyway. So the short of it is that the built-in security features, even for the enterprise edition, is probably not going to help with a data breach where someone actually has any form of access on a database. So then getting to the punchline, then what exactly do you need for today's compliance needs? Well, remember that the main goal is to limit data access to a as needed or need to know basis. So what you want to do is, instead of just encrypting and decrypting on the fly for any user as a database, you really kind of need something that is considered application level encryption and decryption. And what I mean there is, the data obviously has to be processed by application. Your database application needs to receive the data and process it. But as soon as it has it, it needs to encrypt it before it sends it over to the database. Right? And that's what one of the core features of Baffle. We actually provide an application level encryption, or if you prefer, we also can do tokenization on the fly before it goes to the database. And by doing that, you ensure that there's no one who has access to the database with any privilege will be able to see that data inadvertently, or even trying to hack it deliberately. So that's step one. Step two, you want to be able to actually have some control over whether or not someone can query that data. Again, outside the scope of database privileges, because you want your typical DBA really doesn't need to see the data in most cases. So you need what's known as dynamic data masking, where as data is being queried out of the database, there's some enforcement of access that decides whether or not you see all, part, or none of the data. And of course, to sort of complement the masking and the controls on the queries, you need more fine-grained role-based access control. And what I mean here by externally managed is that you want to integrate with other systems, ideally some form of single sign-on or some form of systems out there that will have enterprise scale roles that you can then key off of to implement those controls. And something else that's very unique to Baffle, and that's not even covered at all by the MySQL capability, is MySQL database security feature, is this concept of bring your own key and hold your own key. We want to call this out specifically because as I was discussing about how the landscape of IT systems have changed, we're finding more and more companies using MySQL deploying it in such a way that they're servicing multiple tenant or multiple other businesses. Right, this would be very common for a B2B business like a SaaS vendor, who essentially are storing data on behalf of other businesses. So their MySQL becomes a repository for other business data, and it became really, really important to ensure that each one of these data sets for these different businesses are properly compartmentalized and compliant. So to do that, we actually offer capability to essentially have each data set, whether it be segmented by a subset of rows or segmented by logical databases, to actually be encrypted with its um, own key encryption key and data encryption key. You can even have that key encryption key stored in the end user's own KMS, for example. And that's an incredibly powerful capability because it ensures that, for example, if there's anything that should happen, that end user business can have full control of the data and remove access to the key, essentially making all their data inaccessible by anyone downstream. So that's something that's very unique to Baffle. But of course, all this security capability is not going to be particularly useful if it's very difficult to use. If anything, one of the things that I've observed from all my experience with database security, but I'm sure you've seen this as well, is that if something extremely complex and difficult to deploy, it just doesn't happen. Right? So I'm just going to quickly go over all the things that Baffle does to try to make this process as easy as possible. As mentioned earlier, Baffle does encryption application level, and we can insert ourselves right in the middle, and right between the application and database as a proxy, where it looks like the database to the application, and looks like application database, and encrypts data on the fly. So you don't have to do any application code changes to get encryption, to get application level encryption even. And of course, as mentioned earlier, if you're to do a query, that same proxy is able to actually handle dynamic masking on the way out. And of course, as with any encryption, you need to have proper key management, or the encryption is more or less useless. And one of the things that we do at Baffle for you when implementing this encryption is we integrate with available key management systems out there, the most popular ones. So for AWS, we obviously integrate with KMS and ensure that we do all the necessary lifecycle processes that's necessary to ensure that there's proper key management. And lastly, you need to be able to easily control what's encrypted, what's not encrypted, what's being masked and what's not masked. So we actually provide a user interface, a web-based user interface that essentially allows you to find this policy, but also to visualize that policy. You can actually see what the policy is. And this is important for compliance because you need to be able to tell auditor, look here, these are the columns I've encrypted. This is when I encrypted. And that is really important, again, to address the compliance problem. So at this point, I just want to do a very, very quick demo. There's not a lot of time left. I just want to show again the difference between what the MySQL capabilities, especially pertaining to encryption, is available today in the Enterprise Edition versus what we can do at Baffle. So let me just quickly find my share screen button here. All right. So the webinar app is telling me I'm sharing screen, so I'll proceed until someone screams otherwise. What you can see here is MySQL Workbench, the classic tool for any database administrator, database user for working with MySQL. I've got 3 tabs open. The first is MySQL Enterprise database server that is currently using TDE. And those of you who are currently using Enterprise probably already have this enabled. So I'm just going to quickly run through some set commands I have here. I have a webinar database, and we'll show you who I am. I'm going to be a super powerful user, but this could just as easily be any user that has select privileges. And just as a sanity check, you'll be able to see all the privileges that I have. Okay, so lots and lots of privileges here. And I'm just going to quickly demonstrate that I currently have this employees table encrypted. So basically, I have this webinar employees table encrypted. And by the way, I picked the employees table based on, again, that headline from the Tesla article. The article had some details as to what exactly got compromised. So this is the hypothetical table there. And if I were to just do a simple query from that table, where I populate with some fake data, you can see that I can see the data. And those who are familiar with TDE will tell you this is actually what the behavior should be, because this ensures that the application is not broken if the application were to log in as its own service credential and access it. But the problem is that I'm not the application. I'm a DBA. I'm the person who does backups. I can see all this data, and then think back to the various the key clauses from GDPR and PCI that I have just shared with you. I'm not someone who needs to know this, and I'm certainly not someone who necessarily should have been authorized to see this. Yet I can see it. So this is what I mean by a security feature is designed, worked really well for its time, but not necessarily quite up to modern compliance requirements. So here, what I have now is two tabs here against it for a database that is protected by Baffle. First, I'm going to do a direct connection, and we'll run through some very similar workflows. First, I name the database the same name, webinar. This is actually on RDS. So you're going to see that, for one thing, I'm not root. Those of you who are familiar with spinning up data, MySQL on AWS know that you're not allowed to be root. You have to pick a different user. We call it admin. But just to show you that's a super user, you're going to see, again, the full set of privileges. And so I'm now the role of someone who is more or less a super user on RDS, and I want to access the same employees' data that I'm trying to leak out to the German press here. And this is actually what I see. I'm using format preserving encryption for strings, so it's basically keeping more or less the same length, just mixing up the string. But clearly, this data is useless as far as trying to breach, as far as a hacker or someone trying to breach the data is concerned. But just to show you that this is not necessarily useless to the application, you would obviously route your application through the Baffle Shield. And this is the same database, but connected through a Baffle Shield, which is our database proxy. Again, I'm going to run the same commands, and you'll see I am still the same user, same super privileges, but I can see the actual data, except for the SSM, by the way. So, I basically just wanted to demonstrate very quickly also our masking capability. Even though we actually, by default, can allow decryption of all values through the Baffle Shield, if I've applied a masking policy here to basically say that, well, even though Min Hank is allowed to see most of the data, SSM is so sensitive, we're going to mask it out. So this is the power what Baffle can offer, right? Just this ability to encrypt and give data only on a need-to-know basis, and even apply even finer grade controls so that you can even mask out part of the data, or some columns are part of the data. That is what helps you achieve compliance. So let me quickly stop share and get to the takeaway. So I'm hoping everybody can see the deck now.
I think you have to just make it. There you
Okay.
go.
All right, great. So just a quick recap. What I've been trying to say is that the compliance requirement, in a nutshell, the compliance requirements today as it pertains to data privacy, in a nutshell, is that you really should be only giving access data on an as-needed basis or a need-to-know basis, right? It's a very simple litmus test. Can someone out there who shouldn't have access inadvertently or deliberately gain access to it? Okay, that's a straightforward test. And the truth of the matter is that MySQL does offer a lot of security features, and most of them are Enterprise Edition, but they're not quite appropriate to cover all the bases that's needed for today's compliance requirement. And this is no knock on the security feature that's built in. They were designed and conceived at a very different time. What we're saying is that now you're going to need a little bit more, and really Baffle is what can help you sort of bridge from the past to the future of data security and actually truly ensure that you can meet all those data security requirements for compliance. With that, I'd like to turn it back over to Sushant to wrap things up.
Great, thank you, Min Hank. So going to kind of like the summary slide. with Amazon RDS and Baffle, you get a really great combination. You get better performance and scale and improved availability, plus enhanced cost efficiency with AWS RDS. With Baffle, you can secure your data and control access to your data in AWS. So thinking along the shared responsibility model, right? They will cover the infrastructure and make sure that their cloud is secure, but you're responsible for your data. So this combination of AWS and Baffle gives you the right level of security. So now let's go check your questions. If you'd like to learn more about AWS RDS, you can see the link right there. If you'd like to learn more about Baffle data protection for database, there's a QR code. The URL is fairly simple as well. But now let me bring Ashok on and hit up some of your questions in the time we have left. Here's a good one for you, Ashok. How do I monitor my RDS?
Well, Sushant, I think there are multiple ways you can do that. And I think Minhank also alluded to that, right? You need to make sure the right individual have right kind of access, right? So you can begin with by looking at your CloudTrail logs, which provides an evidence that what are the actions taken by a user, what was user's role, and what action they have performed in Amazon RDS. CloudTrail basically captures all the API calls for Amazon RDS as events, including the calls from the console or from the API. You can even use Amazon CloudWatch alarms and set settings over a matrix which you watch over a period of time. And the moment it crosses a threshold, you can actually send a notification through Amazon SNS topic to really identify if there's an anomaly or a change in access pattern, right? Um, Amazon RDS also provides you a lot of metrics out of the box at no additional cost, but there is also something called as enhanced monitoring that you can enable, to provide more insight, which I think it provides you like 50 different CPU, memory, and file system metrics that can be really helpful based on your operational needs.
Awesome. Here's one for Minhang. Says, you mentioned a number of data security controls. Are these available or already provided by AWS?
AWS, as you saw from Ashok's sort of slide at the end, they provide multiple capabilities, right? They actually provide key management service, for example, for encryption. There's already sort of data at rest encryption that's built in. And as mentioned earlier, these are actually still valuable controls. So the key is or maybe the thing that as a business you want to think about is a defense in depth strategy, where you want to add layers and layers of control. One of the things I just wanted to emphasize in my part of the presentation is that most likely, in fact, I'm pretty certain, given the state of compliance today, you actually need that additional layer on top of everything that AWS offers and so on. That's why we partner with AWS to make sure that our customers and AWS business customers are able to get the additional controls necessary to meet their compliance requirements.
All right. Ashoka, kind of following on that, someone asked, can I encrypt data at rest with RDS databases?
Yes, and I think whenever we think of security, I think encryption is the first thing that comes to our mind, right? So I mean, Amazon RDS supports encryption at rest for all database engines that I mentioned in the presentation earlier, using the keys that you actually manage in AWS KMS, which is the key management service that we provide. On databases running these encryption, you have the data stored at rest in the underlying storage encrypted. Even the backups are encrypted, the read replicas and the snapshots are also encrypted. And all this is handled transparently for you. Even there's an option to add encryption to a previously unencrypted database as well. So you have the flexibility of choosing the level of encryption as well as, if you want to encrypt a previously unencrypted database as well.
All right. Let's see. Oh, Minhang, here's a question for you. What are the performance implications of using the data security features?
Yeah. So, I mean, I can cover both, transparent data or whatever is built in MySQL, and I could also cover with Baffle. Obviously, across the board, anytime you're doing encryption, you're introducing extra CPU cycles, some extra memory requirement, extra I/O. So it's always going to have overhead. With things like TDE, it's pretty much limited well, there's a lot of stats that they've tried to collect, and it's reasonable. It's something I've heard numbers such as low single, low double digits, but the key here is that that's actually all being processed on the database server. For Baffle's data security solution, we're actually deployed outside the database, and we actually are deployed as Docker containers that can run on Kubernetes clusters or in a variety of topologies. So the cool thing about Baffle's encryption data security is that we actually scale almost perfectly horizontally. So even if you have those extra CPU cycles taken away for encryption, and that's true whether you're using TD or any form of encryption, what you get with Baffle is that you can actually tune your deployment so that you can maintain line speed, right? So all our customers basically told us that they don't see any change in their end user experience as far as they're concerned.
All right. Just one more question for you. Says, can I use Amazon RDS with applications that require HIPAA compliance?
Yes, all Amazon RDS database engines are HIPAA eligible. So you can actually use them to build HIPAA compliant applications and store healthcare related information, including the protected health information, under an executed business associate agreement with AWS.
Okay. And then Minheng, last question for you. Is Baffle Data Protection a SaaS offering?
Yeah, I can see where that's can be a confusion sometimes. So, in this age where almost everything is a SaaS, we're actually not a SaaS offering. We are a software solution, as mentioned. We provide you with a containerized version of our software that you can deploy anywhere, whether it be your on-prem system, obviously in your own VPC in AWS. But we've actually got a lot of feedback from a customer. A lot of this is about having control of their data, and they actually didn't want one more SaaS vendor to send sensitive information to. They wanted to have control of the software that is then controlling their data. So you'll be happy to hear that this is something that you could just pick up and deploy anywhere you want.
Awesome. All right. So it looks like we've covered the questions. Let me bring on, thank you everyone for joining us. Again, follow the links for more information, and let me bring on Hormaz to finish off the housekeeping.
Okay, well, thank you, Ashok, Minhang, and Sushant. That was fantastic. I hope your audience has learned a lot as well. Thank you all for joining. And we will be sending you an email with the link to the recording. Please feel free to share that with your colleagues as well. And feel free to reach out to us if you have any other questions. I hope everybody has a good day, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.